Hey everyone, class is in session with the Invisible Night School. My name is Leah Prime. I am here tonight hosting with my lovely co-hosts, Nick, Campbell, and Lewis. Anyone just joining us, welcome. We're glad you're here, whether you're watching live or on a recorded stream later on. The Invisible Night School, for anyone just joining us, is a small consortium of lay researchers and scholars exploring UFOs, UAPs, high strangeness, and the phenomena. You can find us at theinvisiblenightschool.com. You can also find us linked to our various and sundry Twitter accounts and Lewis's dedicated blog, Ufology is Corrupt, in the show information notes. So tonight we're going to be talking with Nick Coffin-Callis to discuss the 1994 Lake Michigan sighting. I appreciate you nodding because I have mispronounced your last name every single time, but I even wrote it out. I transliterated it so that I only stumbled but didn't totally blow it up.
You nailed it. I liked it.
Thank you. Done. But, before we get started, we always like to start the show with a few minutes, just a basic conversation about what's kind of going on in the community, what we're all thinking about. And also, hello to Sways, Spooky, great to see you. Derek, hey. Brooke, always nice to see you. I've seen you here a few weeks in a row. This is awesome. Steve, awesome to have you here. Swink, this is like a who's who of some of my favorite audience members, so super excited to see everyone here. And Ludicrous. Of course, Lord Ludicrous.
What up?
Couldn't say hello without greeting you too. So all of us have a bunch of stuff on the docket, but Campbell, right before the show we were talking about the supposed report that we're going to be getting right around Halloween. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, based on what I've been seeing on UFO Twitter, it's exactly 8 months is October 31st, and that's how long they had to prepare it. We don't know. It could come out tomorrow. It could come out on the 31st. It could come out maybe a little bit after that. The report itself, there's very low expectations, especially after they set those expectations with the first report, the 14 pages. I've seen people sort of limiting their expectations this time around, although I've also seen some comments indicating they think there actually is going to be non-human intelligence disclosure in this report. So I'm very excited to see what happens.
I've seen those comments from a lot of Twitter accounts that have like ambiguous profile pictures and then a lot of numbers on the end of their usernames. Yeah, always the best source of information.
Where are they claiming that they get this idea? Where's this expectation coming from?
Well, it's an interesting question. The only thing that I've sort of seen are vague assertions about, unnamed sources, the usual thing. Like, I think,
classic.
It's just the classic stuff. I didn't dig too deep because, it's like,
sure.
I know before. I mean, well, okay, that sounds a little presumptuous, but I'm quite confident that there isn't like a definitive piece of evidence out there that says there's going to be NHI disclosure in the report. So, it'd be interesting maybe to track that down, but I'm not too concerned about it.
I wonder if this is some people are interpreting this as Jeremy Corbell's silver bullet that's coming.
And could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I haven't heard that term associated with Corbell.
It was a quote taken out of that last Liberation Times piece, which I think was speaking more to that that bill that's supposed to pass about whistleblowers, which is how I took his quote about the silver bullet. These alleged whistleblowers, they're going to come out and talk about legacy projects and crash retrievals and stuff like that. Though I don't really see that being a silver bullet either, unless there's conclusive evidence to come with it. Otherwise, it's more stories like we've had over the past 70 years. But maybe that's the interpretation. I haven't seen really anything else to lead anyone to believe that there'd be any kind of NHI disclosure from this report or any report coming out in the near future. So,
the one thing that I saw on that was somebody retweeted or posted former President Obama's promo video to encourage young people to vote.
Oh yeah.
And, did you see he said aliens and then corrected himself? It's like, yes, I saw in the scripted joke.
That's the joke, guy.
So that raised some expectations, I guess. But, other than that, nothing.
Is that a little concerning that you see people reacting that way to that? Something like very clearly tongue-in-cheek, matching the tone of the rest of the video?
Yeah, that it's something that I thought of immediately, and it was along the same lines as what I thought of as a previous comments. Is that I feel like it's a little bit dangerous, or maybe potentially dangerous in some ways, for former President Obama to sort of like encourage people to think it might mean aliens. And it goes against all of the internal national security documents suggesting they don't want people to be encouraged to think that. So it's confusing on those grounds. What did you think?
I'm assuming he doesn't really know that some people take this.
He doesn't hang out on UFO Twitter.
Right.
He has no idea what kind of epistemological firefighting goes on 24/7.
That's got to be the excuse, because I don't know. I mean, if one of your parents saw that ad, would they take away anything from it? I seriously doubt it. Or just anyone outside of this small community. I don't.
This is the kind of ad where, like, if my parents saw it, they'd send it to me and be like, "Oh, well, look, he said aliens. Isn't that like what you're interested in?" Like, and that would be it. Yeah.
That is it's so funny. That's exactly like anytime I've mentioned to somebody in my like personal life that I'm sort of like doing UFO skepticism type stuff, the next time I see them, inevitably it's always, "How's the alien stuff going?"
Yep.
It's like, no,
flying saucers. When I when I came back from the New York City symposium, I put my parents, particularly my mother, in crisis, who totally thought that I was going, when I talked about being into UFOs, totally thought I was going to something like a comic book convention or like a sci-fi convention. And then I come home and I'm chattering away about non-localized consciousness, psychedelics, near-death experiences, and she was like, "What the fuck? Where were you for today?" Like, she thought, it was like Mars attacks, figurines, and Spock ears, but it's actually way weirder than that, actually.
It is interesting that the public at large kind of just associates those things, though, with something that is by name unknown. People all seem to kind of have an idea of what they think it is culturally. I mean, we've talked about that a million times, just the immediate, just culturally known connection between space aliens and unidentified things that people are seeing.
Yes.
And that's what they run every time it's in the news, right? It's like the footage from storming Area 51, like people in alien masks running down the street and stuff. And so it sort of builds that expectation and gets the laughs. And I guess we saw Obama kind of leaning into that a little bit, because my parents here, if they saw President Obama's little thing there, they would be like, "Report, what the heck's he talking? Aliens." They wouldn't have no idea what he was talking about.
Probably.
Yeah, well, my parents I know for sure, but a lot of people maybe some.
It's also, it's courting the demographic, right? Like, if it's stuff showing up on Twitter, he's going for the, I don't know, geriatric millennial set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was literally a political ad, so yeah, can't take it too seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing I saw that was interesting was this Monday, a couple days ago, NASA started their, I believe it was it's 9-month period, UAP study program with 16 members on the commission, a bunch of very high level people in the guy in charge of it, the chairman, what's his name? Professor or Doctor, I've got it right here.
I was going to say the tall white guy with the glasses, right? But that probably describes the entire research panel.
Yeah, I'm going through the document now and I can't. Okay, David Spergel, and he's got all kinds. President of Simons Foundation, founding director of computational astrophysics. He's got MacArthur Genius Fellow. He's been cited in publications.
Couldn't they find anyone qualified?
More than 100,000 times cited in publications.
Wasn't one of the people on the board a former member of Bigelow Aerospace?
That would be very interesting. I've not seen that.
I thought I heard that. I can't recall now. Okay. Something to look into for sure, at least.
Yep.
I believe it was.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it, right? Like the collective community reaction to this was pretty predictable, right? Like that, there's too many mixed allegiances on this research panel. They're not going to be able to explore the subject in an unbiased fashion. Mm-hmm. There was some statement, I think, made by Spergel about how we're looking into UAPs, but we don't have any reason to expect them to be extraterrestrial, which immediately sent the community off and, they're completely unqualified to take an unbiased approach.
Yeah. It's like, I think it's like the reaction to the Condon report all over again. Really?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I was scrolling through Rather's Twitter account and he had some tweet that was basically raise your hand if you're willing to accept the findings of qualified scientists on this subject.
Nice.
And watching his slow slide into kind of cynical cynical distance from the community has been, I don't know, feels like looking into a crystal ball. Maybe in 6 months I'll be so burnt out that'll happen too. But I mean, when I think about this NASA study, I mean, it's not super well funded. It seems kind of like a vanity project in a lot of ways, right? It helps drum up public support. It's pretty nonpartisan. It's not, just creating weapons to kill each other, which is also nice. But when I think about where it could be potentially really helpful is basically in establishing like data standards and governance around the subject, like as a way to kind of be an quote unquote impartial third party to create just like data governance for the subject, like what formats should be used, how should things be discussed, what's a proposed or potential pathway for reconciling disparate data sources from like different public, private, academic spaces. That to me feels like kind of the most interesting thing they could do with it, given I think it's like $1 million or something. It's not a lot of money.
I don't recall the exactly, but yeah, I remember it was it was a scrap.
Yeah, Louise, have you looked at this at all? The NASA study? Are you familiar with this at all? I was curious what your thoughts are as an academic.
I haven't looked into it as such, but I've heard about it. The first thing that comes to my mind is what would Stanton Friedman have thought if he was still around?
Interesting.
He talked a lot of crap, admittedly, but he did at least try to be kind of serious. So I'm just wondering, like, if this disclosure, the current so-called disclosure process was happening in the 90s, especially, when you had the X-Files going on.
Stanton Friedman, he was a proponent to the end of the MJ-12 documents, wasn't he?
Yes, and also the Betty and Barney Hill case.
Really?
Defended the star map. He got mauled a few, when was it, in 2013 or so, he was on this radio show with a professional astronomer who was grilling him. He was just like getting pummeled.
Was that about the star map discovered by Marjorie Fish with the hanging marbles and stuff like that, based on limited information at the time?
And that it was definitively discredited after the Hipparcos mission, brought back the updated star distance data. But Friedman just sort of doubled down on that, and with MJ-12 as well.
I remember even in the original Cosmos with Carl Sagan, he kind of shot some holes in that star map idea. Just because,
it was already kind of questionable on logical grounds, but the Hipparcos mission, just that was the final nail in the coffin. But you still have people today saying, well, maybe it was this other star system.
Sure.
It always kind of shifts when the evidence, this disconfirming evidence, people just kind of they think maybe it's something else.
What perspective is the star map supposed to even be? I'm
so taken with this professorial smooth move from Nick to just reach back to his bookshelf.
Oh, sorry.
No.
I was trying to.
Cite us. It was awesome.
I was trying to see what year this book came out. Captured. It was not one of his most latest books before he died. He wrote it with I believe it was the niece of Betty Hill, Kathleen Marden. It looks like it was 2007 that this came out. So I mean, he was
pretty recent.
I mean, feels like that was recent, but that was quite a while ago.
Whatever.
Yikes. But yeah, I mean, he was a stubborn dude. I actually got to talk to him a couple times in the past, around 2011, 2012, and really a stubborn person. Coming from different perspectives too. I mean, when asked for evidence, when pressed for any evidence, one of his main sources was Project Blue Book Special Report 14, I think is what it was.
Yeah.
It was, the best you could say out of some of those cases, they were inconclusive. Much like the case I'm going to present tonight, it's inconclusive. But it's a point I try to make when covering this case too, that just because you have something inconclusive, it's still a far leap and even an argument from ignorance to say that this unknown is extraterrestrial. But he was very convinced of the extraterrestrial origin of UFOs, and I thought that was a really frustrating talking point. Speaking to him the couple times I did,
It was quite interesting to see, like, just looking back briefly over his history. Last time I checked, he always stuck so firmly to the physical machine interpretation.
Oh yeah, that's very nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
Exactly what anyone would picture, grays in a vehicle, like humanoid aliens in vehicles, much like us, coming down and visiting us, apparently abducting us and doing like rudimentary genetic and medical tests on us.
Yes, and he originally he's a nuclear physicist, right? And he worked on propulsion systems like nuclear reactors in aircraft. So I imagine that must have influenced his sort of imagination when he would look up at these objects.
I feel like that gave him a kind of a boost in credibility to a lot of average people.
There's a website called The Sources That Time Forgot. Do you guys know about that?
Yes, Kurt Collins, right?
Yep.
There's actually an article there which talks about Friedman. He was part of a group that was like trying to replicate a flying saucer, like some of the characteristics, and then trying to sort of put that into a machine. But
that apparently didn't happen, right?
I think it was a company which was, I don't know, it might have been like General Dynamics or something. Some company was like doing a small scale study kind of on what it would take to replicate the witnessed aspects of UFOs. But I don't know, it didn't really go very far. Right. But apparently Friedman was part of that crew.
Okay, I was just thinking about the other side. Where are the 5 observables from? Is that something that Elizondo came up with himself? Like, where are these things from? Because they're always being cited, and I realized I had no idea.
Yeah, I don't know the origin either. I mean, I hear Mick West mention them all the time too.
I have a feeling that Elizondo came up with them himself. I don't know. Because they don't make any sense, because most UFOs don't exhibit the 5 observables, the most convincing cases even.
Right.
Whatever. Anyway, that's an aside, but it just made me think of it.
It is kind of strange. I don't know the origin of that.
And then he says he's not a UFO guy, but he's like coming up with the criteria to define one.
I mean,
whatever. Anyway, I don't want to bash on Mr. Elizondo too much right now. But okay. I wanted to mention too, actually, about the NASA study. Did anybody here see John Greenwald posted a few days ago a FOIA internal report that the current chairman of the UAP study group, David Spergel, wrote in NASA? It was like last year or something. He circulated it internally, a small report to explain what he thought was going on with UAP.
I don't know that.
This is probably what collectively triggered the community.
Interesting.
This FOIA document.
Okay, yeah, because that makes sense. Because it was a few days ago, and the document includes. So he goes through it's only 2 pages, but it's like 3 paragraphs. He's like, so what is going on here? Number 1, the really high speeds, the shapes of potentially triangular objects, they're consistent with some advanced, technology, fighter craft and stuff that we're developing in the States. And then he goes to the second paragraph and he says, there are atmospheric phenomena that are little understood. He says that there are potentially semi-stable plasma structures that can form in the atmosphere. And then he links to a document about skirmions, which are the lab reproducible ball lightning equivalents.
Right.
So that's interesting that he, as the second option, he's like advanced fighters being seen, some kind of atmospheric plasma phenomena, semi-stable state that we aren't super familiar with. And then the third thing he says, potentially extraterrestrials. But then he says, it's quite interesting, because he's like, based on the technology level required to get here, they could choose to not be seen. So in his view, what we're seeing as UFOs doesn't meet what he would expect from such a highly advanced civilization. And so he says it's very unlikely because of the observed, features. It's very unlikely to be extraterrestrial, which I think is interesting. He even addresses it. But yeah. Did you guys have any thoughts on that rundown? Quite interesting. Nick, what about you?
The extraterrestrial part, I'm a little dubious of, obviously. I mean, like I said, there's never anything conclusively extraterrestrial about any of the sightings. But I like the atmospheric plasma shout out. That's
kind of interesting, eh?
Yeah.
Right.
It's nice that it's getting some play.
Oh, Spooky was just asking, was it written for us? No, it was an internal report that was not supposed to be publicly released, but it was subject to FOIA, and Greenwald got it that way.
Yeah, and it sounds like a few of the audience members here, I have Shaikhan saying that the 5 observables here predates Elizondo, and then we have our beloved Simon Fly saying that he thinks Elizondo did come up with this as his side hustle at ATIP. So
not a great side hustle if it was getting paid.
No, it's getting paid in exposure.
Where's that book?
Yeah, where is that?
Dude, it's coming out like 2024. Actually, the book that Chris Bledsoe's book is coming out like imminently, like in the next 4 weeks. Yes, UFO of God. Looking forward to reading that.
UFO of God.
UFO of God.
Talking about the 5 observables. Travis Taylor.
He might have been involved with it, eh?
Oh, who knows?
Yeah, has he mentioned those at all?
Oh, okay. I don't know. He would be an interesting figure though, because of his.
I do have to eat that book if it.
Yep.
I won't have to eat that book. It's not coming out.
It's never going to come out. Yeah.
No. How can I eat it if it never comes out? We'll see. You know what? If it does, I gotta really look into how to actually consume a book. But I'm not too worried. I'm feeling relaxed. I don't think we're going to be seeing that thing.
It'll be your fiber intake for.
Oh, for sure.
Weeks. Yeah.
There's got to be a way to like physically do it. I'm sure I'll be.
Yeah, just like shred it up and put it in like pasta or something. I don't know. Like.
Okay. Yeah.
I feel like I'm drawing on like all sorts of like drug ingesting modalities to like recommend how you actually eat a book.
Well, we'll cross that bridge when I come to it, if I come to it, which I don't plan on. We'll see.
Yeah. And well, Leah, what about you? What did you think of the current chairman of the UAP study group at NASA, like his rundown of those 3 things? Like, how does that confly with your views?
Yeah, so I mean this confirms sort of my general view. Like where I sit in this kind of universe is generally that like I think I find notions of extraterrestrial, e.g., like literal aliens coming from other planets visiting the United States, an extremely long bow to draw. I do think there are very compelling. Not necessarily agreeing, but very compelling notions around non-human intelligence and engagements, whether it's with like non-localized consciousness or sort of like, I think there's a lot of permutations that can take that far exceed sort of the conventional like aliens from another planet. I think as a steward of this project, he is under kind of he's under an obligation to seriously interrogate this subject, which in turn means evaluating and not dismissing any of the possibilities, but also that it is, again, as a steward of this subject and as someone who has a demonstrated track record of serious academic contribution, like he has to serve as a filter and not a sponge. Otherwise, the entire project is going to get sunk into pursuing all these little minutiae instead of what is, logistically speaking, most likely to be what's been observed. So, I mean, I don't know. It feels like a very reasonable conclusion. I also agree with him. I mean, his statement about like, if it is extraterrestrials, like they're not going to be witnessed is like balls of plasma gas seems pretty reasonable to me. The only exception being if we're going to go far afield in the deep woo and be like, well, maybe the plasmas like exhibit some degree of consciousness or self-organization. Those are not interchangeable. Self-organization doesn't mean something's conscious. But that seems like maybe a bit too fine grain or nuanced to come out of just like a basic memo. So I don't know. It feels to me like he's being a good steward of the subject. And I also feel like he certainly has the credentials to treat this subject seriously and with a degree of like legitimacy that it deserves.
Interesting. And Louise, just to wrap up on this, what do you think of that?
What specifically?
Oh, sorry. Yes, the 2-page FOIA report by John Greenwald that summarized the current chairman's views being number 1, technology, number 2, atmospheric phenomena, number 3, extraterrestrials, but very unlikely.
Yeah, that sounds like a reasonable, hierarchy.
Yeah. You approve.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Another point for the plasma, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, in either way, like, it's super cool, right? Like, it's just an opportunity to learn more about the kind of mysterious universe we inhabit. And I think that's really exciting. You know, like, at the end of the day, it's super cool.
And I think it's pretty, it could spiral into what we're going to be talking about with Lake Michigan because of the observed features on radar of like forming some geometric shapes at times, like parent triangles and stuff, which is what a feature of Skirmians in the lab, forming triangles and rectangles and things like that. So pretty cool.
I drew a picture for you, Campbell.
Oh yeah, what type of picture?
We'll see.
Oh, nice.
Which this was an excellent segue into the 1994 Lake Michigan case.
Should I kick it off?
Yeah, take it away, Nick. That's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah. So March 8th, 1994. It was a clear night, cold. Technically, the Aurora Borealis was visible in parts of Michigan, though growing up in Michigan, they say that a lot and you can't quite see it, but it's a data point, right? So around 9 p.m. in Grand Haven, which is about 30 miles north of Holland, where most of the on-the-ground sightings happen, a woman named Cindy Pravda was in her kitchen looking out her window, talking on a phone to her friend, and she witnessed, and Leah, can you pull up the first slide there?
I can add the slides to the stream, but you're on your own, pal.
Sure. Okay, I got them. So what she described was a horizontal line of what she says it looked like 4 full moons, bright white balls, out her kitchen. The way she was facing south out her window, and interestingly, and I don't think this gets brought up very often, the night before, a trucker who was just south of Cindy's house on a highway there described a very similar sighting of a horizontal line of lights that he saw there that shot off. But back to Cindy. This is back on March 8th. She's looking out the window and she sees this string of 4 full moons, as she calls it, and the outward one keeps shooting away and coming back. So kind of like a broken Newton's cradle, as I show in this drawing here. Now she watches this for about 25 minutes, half an hour before it just shoots off. So we're around 9:30 p.m. Now, like I said, 30 miles south in Holland, we start getting the first on-the-ground witnesses here. And is this large enough? Can you guys see this well? We've got points 1, 2, and 3 on the kind of infamous 911 tape. We begin hearing the recordings of some of the witnesses. The first voice you hear is Holly Graves. She's at position 2 here. She says what she sees, and she was this was brought to her attention by her children who were watching TV in the living room. I visited this house, and you can see right out that front window there used to be a farm, if you're looking at this drawing to the right there, that they saw it. The way she described it on the call was like a string of Christmas lights up in the sky. So she's seeing colored lights kind of turning in a circle and moving in a southern direction here. She's nearly on the corner of 16th and Country Club. The second voice you hear is actually, I think it's Troy Prince's cousin at first, then Troy Prince. They were up around the corner here in position 1 on a second floor balcony, also looking out. And what they saw, technically slightly before the Graves is at position 2, he saw a group of lights come together and form a circle. And it starts spinning around. He describes it like a wreath, really similar to Holly's description of Christmas lights, a string of lights up in the sky. He says he saw these lights individually come together, which you don't hear much on the 911 call, but this is Officer Velthouse, the responding officer's incident report here, where it goes into a little bit more detail of them coming together and traveling in the same distance. So at this point, you have people at position 1 and 2 both seeing this and describing it on tape in real time. The next voice you hear is actually Holly's husband, Daryl. I confirmed that with her personally fairly recently. And what he describes is he says he thought that maybe they were balloons with lights attached to them, because by the time he's seeing this, by the time the kids get him and all out of the house to look at this, they've split up again. So they're no longer in that circle formation that the kids originally saw and drew pictures of. And they're spreading apart and moving south down Country Club Road. By this point, they say that there's an officer on the way. He's going to come to their house to observe this. Now, Holly, the first 911 call is Holly. It took place at 9:35 p.m. By 9:45, Officer Velthouse has arrived at this house. But just slightly before then, an anonymous woman and her son at position 3 here, this is about 2 miles south, so right down Country Club, they described seeing these lights also split up now, motionless, hovering, kind of before, kind of in the middle of this drawing here, the middle of this arc. They were motionless sitting there, which Daryl Graves also describes later when the police officer shows up. But then they start moving south again. This is 9:45 p.m. now. Officer Velthouse arrives at Daryl and Holly Graves' home, and he witnesses these objects too through Daryl's binoculars. And he says that they don't appear to be aircraft lights, that they're kind of oscillating, and he sees them in 2 clusters. So he starts traveling south along Country Club to try to catch up with them. He says he never does. He ends up getting to a small airport that's south of there called Tulip City Airport, but they had been closed since, I think, 8 p.m. And he loses sight of them. So I want to, this is right before the radar portion takes place. So I want to stop here, see if there's any questions about the, Simon says military flares. I don't know, based on the movement, possibly, maybe. But yeah, any questions so far on this? Let's see.
Yeah, we have another question from Swink McLeod here. Any idea how far up or how big these lights were?
Now, this was attempted to be determined at this point by MUFON by holding up objects at the end of
like a quarter or a nickel or whatever.
3,000 feet was what they came up with, but keep in mind these are lights in the sky,
right.
So not very accurate.
And the radar, in the next section, it provides some more information about that, right? Because
yes,
they are, yeah. So
he's saying from 6,000 to 8,000 feet. I think it's mentioned on my slide. There's some contention to that. Michael Swords did the one of the further investigations, and he contends that Jack Bouchon, the radar operator, meant kilometers, not feet. And just misspoke. I don't know about the accuracy of that. Jack has never corrected that. I've talked to him multiple times, and he didn't seem to think so.
I have a question. This is maybe more of a people style question, but in these circumstances, what do you think prompts people to call 911? I guess the second question would be, I haven't listened to these phone calls, but are people distressed on the call?
No, they seem amazed. They're amused, kind of. They're chuckling. They're like, most of them kind of preface, they're like, I know this isn't an emergency, but I'm seeing something really weird. Can you come check it out? And you can hear the operators kind of take on it change over. At first he's like, okay, yeah, we're sending it. Yeah. And then more and more people are coming. He's like, oh my God. And you can hear him getting kind of excited and a little weirded out. Cool. Especially when he ends up reaching out to the National Weather Service, which is in Muskegon, kind of close to Grand Haven, where this starts. Mm-hmm. So they call the weather office, if you don't mind me moving on. Unless there's more questions.
I was going to say, we still have a couple questions. So we have another one from Swink. Didn't people see them for hours? Because we're already talking at least an hour, probably, right? Because the first person saw them for 25, 30 minutes.
It's kind of hard to estimate. I would say that Jack, the radar operator, was called around 9:50. That's my best guess. It's not certain. Now, technically, the radar operator did watch them for hours. The on-the-ground witnesses was more like 20, 25 minutes. Mm-hmm. Or at least this group. There were a smattering of people between here and the south end of the border of Michigan seeing brief sightings. I've talked to a couple other witnesses. And my friend Dylan's in the chat asking a question.
Cool.
But they were brief. Let's see. Mm-hmm. She says Christmas lights. She say they were colored. Some Christmas lights are just white. She spoke to me just a few days ago, and she said they were also blue and green, so not just white.
In the Unsolved Mysteries episode, they also quote a police officer saying that they saw multicolored in the same way.
Yes, that was Officer Velthouse. He was the responding officer at the Graves home.
Okay.
Okay. Moving on to the radar section, or do we have a couple more questions?
Did James Oberg ever weigh in on this? Maybe that it was a satellite re-entry or something?
I haven't heard that.
Okay.
But possibly. So we get to this point. Ottawa County Dispatch is getting... He makes a claim that there was roughly 60 calls. I don't know the accuracy of that, but that is what's recorded. So he is advised to call the National Weather Service because they have a weather radar there up in Muskegon, and he wants to see if they can show up on anything there. At this point, the dispatch officer is suggesting that they're seeing radio towers, the blinking lights of radio towers, though the sun, the anonymous sun in position 3, denies that. So that's his incident report. They talk about speaking to Troy Prince, who was up around the corner a little bit, and Holly Graves, essentially seeing he saw lights. They were oscillating. They were very strange. Tried to follow them and lost them. Now we get to the radar operator, who starts picking up returns, anomalous returns at about South Haven, which I think is another 30 or 40 miles south along the coast. First, he picks up one large return here. He says they're very bright, meaning that they are reflecting the majority of the radar beam that it's sending out. You don't get like a shape or anything on the radar screen, just kind of a hit. What he's saying is that they're brighter than like conventional aircraft or storms. I've spoken to Jack a lot of times. In one of the conversations, he said it crossed his mind at the time that they might be assisting the radar in some way just because of how bright they were. It kind of shocked him. He thought maybe they were contributing to it. And he said he definitely had the impression that they were aware of not only him observing them, but the method in which he was observing them. This is all an intuitive feeling that he had. And this is how
interesting.
Yeah.
So by the method, he means that he felt like intuitively that they were reacting to being like observed on radar, kind of speculatively. Okay, interesting.
You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of the Hudson Valley sightings, where people felt like imbued with a sense of transcendence or interaction with what they were witnessing. Yeah, it's interesting.
So I drew this diagram to kind of describe the way he was seeing them. So he was seeing them essentially cluster. Well, first it was one contact, and then it was 3, and they were kind of moving in a southwestern direction. And what he said was that they were, sorry, we got some questions in a minute. He said that they were in a triangular formation because when you're looking at the radar screen, you're looking at a top-down perspective. Mm-hmm. But each of the returns were at different elevations, and they would move up and down in elevation, but remain in a triangular formation. And they would kind of, one would shoot off, and then the rest would follow and meet up and kind of meet in that formation again. Not too unlike what Cindy Pravda described at the beginning of the sighting. See a formation of the 4 all horizontal, and one would shoot off and come back, and then they all moved. So similar characteristics, though I do want to point out, and this is really important, that we can't conclusively connect these on-the-ground visual sightings with the radar sightings. There is no point where we can actually like nail down that someone was looking at it and Jack was looking at it at the same time. I thought that was...
So it's like, at best, it's like maybe tightly correlated, but there's no exact direct line between the two.
It's moving in the general same kind of curve that I showed in this slide here, only on a larger scale, moving out past the coast of Lake Michigan, so the western coast of Michigan. Mm-hmm. Here's a radar blank. So Jack watches these from, like I said, I kind of estimated around 10 p.m. till midnight. Now, he says by midnight, they kind of swarmed up here at the bottom where these red dots are in Lake Michigan. And he said that he saw more returns coming in from different directions, and they all met at this point. And he describes it as kind of like a beehive or an anthill where they were just kind of moving around there. And he says he watched them till about midnight. Now, I wanted to address a comment I saw. It was by Hinch. Weather radar Jack interviewed him. Radar ended his shift at midnight, in which time he said there were dozens. Oh no, that was what I was talking about. Someone mentioned the waterfall UFO that was shown in Unsolved Mysteries. Now, the narrative that episode kind of pushed was that sighting was taking place at the same time he was watching them on radar, and it kind of pinpointed and corroborated it. Now, if you recall, these things were all moving between 10 and 11 down to this position, and he watched them, 11 to midnight. Midnight was the time that those people claimed that they saw it they were sleeping on the coast of Benton Harbor, which is a little north and quite a bit east of this point here. So the timeline doesn't really match up, and I'm really dubious of that account. While it very well may be an original account from the time, it appeared to have come from one of the original witnesses, one of the original investigators from MUFON, Ginny Tilley. Now, she hadn't reported on this sighting in particular ever. So this sighting was new to this show.
Nick,
and
quick question.
Yeah.
When we're talking about the event, at what point in the chronology of the event is MUFON involved? Like, do they come out the next day? Do they come out 2 weeks later?
It's hard to pinpoint. I've read their personal reports and I've read their journal article, and they are very vague about that. I know it's fairly quickly because there is a Michigan chapter. They show up fairly quickly. I want to say it's within a week or so, though. It's, I don't think it's specifically known except for to those people. Donald K. Ashley Jr. and Virginia Tilley were the MUFON investigators.
Right.
So, as I was saying, clear night, cold night. It's the middle of March in Michigan. Jack and I, in a bunch of our conversations, he always brings up the fact that Lake Michigan was frozen over that night, but he believed that this southern region here, where they all met up, was one of the only spots on Lake Michigan that wasn't frozen over. And he and I were having a discussion. I said, I believe that NOAA, or at least somebody, keeps ice records of those, which I did find here and here. These are two records from, actually, these are the night before. But if you notice this section down here, this lavender is 5% ice coverage, when the majority of it is about 96 here. That purple is about 90. So he was correct. It could be a coincidence. I don't see any causal link between these two things personally, though it is another data point that I want to bring up. However, this is while doing kind of preliminary research for the Unsolved Mysteries episode and during the filming, I did notice that they put an emphasis on asking me questions about water sightings along Lake Michigan. I believe that was part of the story that they were telling also. I think that episode did a fairly good job with telling the story in their limited time. I know they cut things down and stuff like that. But it's helpful to remember that this is a story. It's a TV show. It's for entertainment, and narratives are added along with that. So Jack coming back to Michigan to solve this, to line up the radar sightings and the visual sightings. That was kind of what they were going for with the episode, and they included that waterfall UFO to kind of emphasize that story. Now, it's of my personal opinion that there may have been some confabulation there. There was another case in 1994 in Australia. I think we talked about this a little bit last time. Gosford Lake, I believe it was, that involved sightings of UFOs sucking up water from a reservoir or a lake, or it was a lake. And I think that they may have confabulated those. Like I said, this could be an original account, that waterfall UFO, but I have personally never heard it. It's never been reported on. So, and I don't really think it adds any value to the story. It's not corroborated by the 911 calls or Jack, really. It's just another story. I wouldn't put too much value into that.
I find it very interesting that it was added. I think I mentioned this last week too, but most of the comments I see about that episode seem to revolve around this water UFO thing.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it's really capturing people's attention.
Yeah, it's quite intriguing.
And I mean, like I said, these claims, you hear about this happening. I think even the Wynneque Reservoir back in 65, I think that was in 65, maybe it was in the 50s. I believe that was doing something similar.
And why do you think? Why is it that the water being pulled up? Why is that so popular in the psychology? Do you think? Yeah, why are people?
I mean, I think it's becoming popular because this has entered the community's imagination, because Elizondo has talked about this, right? Like Chains of the Sea, talking about Chains of the Sea, talking about unidentified submersible objects.
Yeah, UFOs
as much a consideration. Yeah. And so I think it's kind of also just speaking to the community preoccupations of the moment.
Yeah, I mean, this is a Lake Michigan UFO case. Maybe they wanted to tie the lake into it. USOs, like I said, being in vogue again.
There's also the nuclear energy issue, that maybe these craft are being powered by fusion energy, so they're sucking up water and they're getting the hydrogen out.
Right. You know, Louis, that's a great point, because it does kind of play into that like free energy, hydrogen.
There we go.
I mean, that's woven into the tapestry of conspiracy theories.
Absolutely.
And they've been trying to use the what are they called, the tokamak reactors, which you know about, Campbell, to try to get nuclear fusion, but that's been like going for decades.
Yeah, that's an unusual form, but yeah, Soviet science somehow was better than our science on the plasma state. Creating the donut shape was more stable than a sphere, it seems. But yeah, still no success there. But interestingly, something that I just remembered when you mentioned this, Leah, the Dr. Massimo Teodorani is the astrophysicist on the Galileo project. He's a solar physicist, worked at SETI at the Medicina Radio Telescope, did the field studies at Hesdal, and he speculated back in 2004 that what he was observing was some kind of basically exactly what the chairman of NASA thing said. He said some kind of plasma, ball lightning, some kind of plasma phenomena occurring in these various areas. And now he has speculated that I don't necessarily believe this, but it's an interesting possibility that there may be some kind of mechanism we don't fully understand around these things, and that a neutron stars, and this is very, very highly speculative, that UFOs might actually represent a kind of neutron star that is forming in Earth's atmosphere, because the features are so similar to what you would expect from a neutron star. There's a north pole, a south pole. The neutron stars that we observe eject material out of the pole, and then it conceptually could be drawing in material from the other pole. The conservation of angular momentum would cause the rotation.
This is fascinating.
Yes, and this is all purely speculative. There's no evidence for this, but Teodorani,
we can appreciate the aesthetics of this idea, though. It's very cool.
And if you look at a disk galaxy on the side, it literally is a UFO. And this is what he sort of speculates might be what we're seeing.
Dude, it's UFOs all the way down, Campbell.
Well, maybe that's sort of interesting too. Eric Davis, Ken Shoulders, these guys, they think that that the universe is made up of tiny ball lightnings that are interacting in these ways, and like it's an alternate cosmology for which there is not sufficient evidence right now to support. But it's an interesting underlying feature that a lot of these guys who have been in this for so long, they are committed to an alternative cosmology of the entire universe that replaces dark matter, dark energy, and even gravity with pure electromagnetism, which is quite
fascinating,
outrageous sort of. But
by the way, there was a TV show going from 1993 to 90 to 96 called Sequest DSV.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah,
with
it was
Darwin the talking dolphin.
Yeah, Darwin the talking dolphin, and this giant submarine, and this sort of like a peacekeeping submarine. And I think it was fairly popular at the time. We had it in Australia, but I don't know. Maybe that sort of aquatic theme might have helped push the water angle along.
I wonder, or it's all in the mind of the director.
Yeah, there's an audience comment here from Derek here. I think people correlate water with life, so it sparks the imagination, right? I think actually that's a really compelling idea or thought, right? Because we do associate water as being, I mean, it is an essential part of life. So to make that connection makes sense to me.
And
go ahead.
So I'll just one last thing. Just it's an interesting thing as well to note that when like at the Max Planck Institute for Plasma Physics in 2006, when they were successfully replicating old Soviet science claims of being able to create coherent plasmoids in the lab, they used an electric very high energy electric discharge in a vat of water. And it is a very intense burst of electricity being applied to a water body. And, there's dozens of these videos online of the scientists doing this. And then out of the water emerges a plasmoid that is often has many of the features that we're talking about. So quite interesting that it's a high energy burst plus water does produce plasmoids in the lab.
It's definitely something to keep your mind on when going through this.
Yeah, something to think about.
I saw a question here. Nick, do you know if the campsite has any sort of record? One, I don't know if those witnesses were in a legitimate campsite or if they were just sleeping on the beach.
In winter, right?
In winter, in
Right.
March, in Michigan.
In Michigan.
On the lake shore. I will
Positively balmy.
I will do the due diligence and actually look into that. I've already been in contact with a lot of the local libraries up and down the shore about previous hot air balloon companies that may have explained some of the on the ground sightings. They couldn't find any. There was none operating there. I have to check out in further sweeps, and I'm going to add this to the list because this case I'm still not done with, of course, but because it's not solved yet. But that's a good point, and I'm going to put a pin in that and check that out. That's a good idea. I'd really love to actually get in touch with Ginny Tilley, the investigator. I had hoped when we went to do the filming for this episode of Unsolved Mysteries that I'd be able to connect with her and Troy Prince, two people I haven't been able to actually get a hold of when reaching out to all the original witnesses in my investigation. Mm-hmm. They kept us all separate, so I didn't have the opportunity. I know that the show got through to her through I think a nephew or something. I didn't feel comfortable doing that. So hopefully our paths cross in the future, so we can talk about it. She actually plays another part of the story later. So we've the sightings concluded. We've had the on the ground witnesses. We've had Jack watching them on the weather radar. A lot of explanations for that weather radar comes up. Ground clutter is one of them, though he can conclude that it wasn't ground clutter due to the jumping elevations of these objects. He would raise the beam up at a high angle off the ground. Ground clutter would come from the beam kind of clipping the tops of buildings and trees, stuff like that, showing an object there, let alone their motion. Temperature inversions are another suggestion. I think that I think it was Robert Schaefer and even Phil Klass at one point threw that out there for this case. And while that doesn't necessarily explain the on the ground eyewitness accounts, I know that temperature inversions were responsible, or at least claimed to be responsible for the 1952 Washington, D.C. UFO sightings that were also picked up on radar. And it is something that would give a radar return. So it's another thing to keep your mind on when we're going through this case. Now, as we mentioned, MUFON was first on the scene, as they usually are. They're the closest thing to a household name for UFO investigations. So, of course, Michigan MUFON was on the case. Now, coming from the perspective of Michael Swords, another investigator out of J. Allen Hynek's QFOS in Illinois, there was a reputation after MUFON had come and gone that they kind of harassed a lot of the witnesses and put a sour taste in their mouth. I don't know the accuracy of that. It seems to be the case, but not only did they mention they interview all these witnesses that we went through, they also collected a lot of. Actually, I believe it was. I have it in it. They mentioned in their journal at the time that there were. This one, 10 videotapes and a dozen photographs collected from this sighting. Now, this was cool. In a UFO journal. This was the Michigan Radar Case Part 1. Part 2 never came out. And
suspicious.
Yeah, and none of those photos or videos were ever released. Now, the article makes specific mention twice of a woman who lived near Decatur. She lived in a town called Marcellus, which is right by there. But the significance of that is Decatur is very close to one of the radar returns that Jack mentions, and it's corroborated by the 911 tape where he's calling off where he's picking up these sightings. One of them was over Decatur. It was kind of the easternmost object that he was tracking, hovered around there. This says around 9:30. I think that was probably an estimate after the fact. However, I think that if any of those videos, particularly this woman from Marcellus's video, had any kind of landmarks or anything, or even a time, we could probably close that gap at least a little bit between the eyewitness sightings and the radar sightings. You know what I mean? But like I said, these have never been released. I have reached out to the current chair of Michigan MUFON. His name is Bill Konkoleski. He essentially ghosted me and said that MUFON likes to present their own information on their own time.
30 years later? Come on, dude.
Yeah. And see, when I found out I got cut from this episode, I was like, well, I think Konkoleski is going to be in it. And this is a real opportunity for MUFON to present their evidence as they like.
Right. What better possible platform, right? Because they're already introducing new narratives.
Right.
Like, here's MUFON's chance.
Right. And I noticed, I watched the episode the day it came out, and I noticed it was essentially a commercial for MUFON right in the middle of it, flashed their logo up, talked about how much evidence they collect, how many members they have. And then they kind of failed to mention what they do with that evidence or why they're collecting it, which I still...
Did they fail to mention it, or is there nothing to mention?
Maybe there's nothing to mention. I mean, they sell books.
Or maybe there's shadowy forces behind the scenes pulling the strings.
I mean, people do make that claim, right?
Of course.
They do.
Dude, it's UFOs. Like...
But the fact does remain that none of these photos or videos have been released. I say, why not? I've been told that they're not much of anything, lights in the sky, but even if there's any kind of identifying landmark, they could be useful. Like, let me determine that. Let me determine if they're useful or not. Let's see them, even if they're nothing.
Right, and it's already UFOs that we're talking about. So like standards of evidence and like epistemology here are inconsequential.
I agree.
Right, everything gets decided in the court of public ufology opinion.
So yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I know other people have reached out to him to try. He says, "Oh yeah, let me dig those up," and then just kind of ghosts those people too. Despite him coming on this show as of last year. I mean, we filmed last year promoting this show. I mean, he agrees. I mean, these are the words of Michael Swords, but this is one of the better observed cases of modern times. I mean, we've got not only do we have independent eyewitnesses that corroborate what they're seeing, but we have their recordings of their statements in real time. So they haven't had the opportunity to evolve in any way or be exaggerated. Just by simple recall, you can exaggerate memories like this. In fact, if you notice, in this episode that they presented, it's quite a bit more dramatic what they're seeing than a string of Christmas lights in the sky. But, these things happen. That's why I appreciate that 911 call. None of the actual UFO investigators on the scene, be that MUFON, NICAP, or QFOS, actually thought to get that released. It was a local writer for the Muskegon Chronicle named Mike Walsh. He just went to he called the police station and said, like, "Hey, could I have a tape of that?" And they just sent it right over. I think that's like one of the best pieces of evidence in this case. So what makes it so compelling is you can kind of sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. In that investigation, Michael Swords from QFOS came and met with Jack, and they took radar blanks and redrew what he was seeing on the scopes, because it was kind of an older machine. This was 1994, mind you, but the machine was a bit older than that, and it didn't create like a computer record. So they had to redo it after the fact. But luckily, because of that tape, we can kind of corroborate what he's saying in real time and match it up with some of his drawings. I noticed that I think number 4 and number 5 are out of order, because I think they're numbered for like 1 through 12, and he does like a series of them. Some of them are a little out of order, but they do match up with what he's saying on the tape. So it's the next best thing, I suppose. And they look like this, essentially. I showed you an earlier one too. Were you about to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, just at a high level, what makes this such an interesting case to me is it has that cross-system corroboration, right? Where you have multiple systems that are generally telling the same story, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they have conclusions about what they're witnessing.
Exactly.
But I think the most compelling cases are the ones where you have both instrumentation that's demonstrating something's going on, in addition to compelling witness testimony, in addition to some kind of on the spot day zero kind of documentation associated with what the witnesses saw, right? Like I'm with you where it seems like this is like one of the strongest cases, full stop. It's certainly stronger than a lot of the kind of popularly conceived of strong cases that we see discussed in the community.
Yeah, I agree. And like I said at the beginning of this, nothing about any of these sightings even insinuates in any way that it's extraterrestrial or even a craft of any kind. This is just kind of an aerial anomaly, right? But I feel convinced that at least the on the ground people were looking at something out of the ordinary, a group of lights that comes together and kind of encircles itself and moves apart. Like, that's pretty odd. While it could have been orchestrated as a hoax in some way, that's a possibility. But that in and of itself is kind of out of the ordinary, right? We don't.
Yeah, and plus, like, after 30 odd years, you would generally. It feels like that hasn't even. Look, I'm not the kind of case expert you are, but like the notion of it being a hoax hasn't even kind of entered any kind of dialogue around this case.
Not really. I mean, the closest he could come was Holly's then husband Daryl he's the I think the third voice in the 911 call, saying that they might be balloons with lights attached to them, and he said that just because from what he saw, he didn't see them come together and form. He only saw them in a formation and then break apart, and it was kind of based on that.
And also, it's verbal conjecture while you're witnessing something that's defying explanation.
Sure.
Like, of course, you would say things like that because you're verbally reasoning through what you're observing.
I don't know that he was even convinced himself of that, because you can hear him chuckling about it, and he says, "They're out there, man." Like, and he seemed to be really excited that other people were seeing and calling them too.
I was just thinking about how, like, Louise mentioned James E. Oberg, the NASA scientist, former NASA scientist, or I guess maybe still does contract work, but anyway, he's a major skeptic, debunker of UFO stuff, and it made me think it's like his case doing the Fireball satellite reentry over Hawaii a few years ago convinced me personally that people can report something that like huge numbers, something that sounds impossible to explain any normal way, and then it turns out that it can be explained, because that event, it was a satellite reentry, and I've never seen one like this till I looked up these videos. I wouldn't have known what it was if I saw it a few years ago. Right. But it's like the satellite comes in and it breaks up, but then all the pieces are traveling at the same speed, right? So it looks, and so then hundreds of people saw this, and then like half of them said that they saw a structured craft because your brain fills in the blanks with the lights moving together at the same speed. So it is interesting to think it's like if a bunch of people saw something like that, like that's a brief event though. That's like maybe 15 seconds across the sky. Sure. They're also strange because they travel very slowly compared to what you would expect from a shooting star. So, it makes sense people would sort of characterize them strangely, but it would almost require like multiple re-entries or something over this period of time. So it is intriguing that there's no like coherent like sufficient plausible sort of, it's not like a one-off observation of a light that maybe is moving around and stuff. Like it's like multiple people, you hear the tapes from the police at the same time, a bunch of people from different places saying like this line of lights, multicolored, coming together, circling around, dissipating. Very strange.
I agree.
Very interesting.
I mean, I think that the satellite reentry is even similar to the Hudson Valley case that I talk about all the time. That is like nearly conclusively conclusively, as far as I'm concerned, a group of small planes, a group of Cessnas flying, despite all of these people's extraordinary experiences they had with it. In fact, even one person experienced it hovering over water and sending probes down.
Right. Well,
which a group of planes was not doing that. So it's interesting. But yeah, I think just the fact that these people were spread out, independent, didn't know each other, were all very closely describing the same thing, even down to when it stopped in position. Daryl Graves, before Officer Velthouse showed up, was looking at him in his binoculars. He said they stopped. And then that woman and her son 2 miles south also made that same claim, that they hovered in position after they broke up for a minute in one place and then began to move again. It's odd. It's compelling that it's something possibly strange, is as far as I'm willing to take that. But
I'd already asked you about the tenor of these calls and witness reports, right? Was anyone freaking out? Was it traumatic?
No.
I think the other question I have is, what kind of conclusions do you hear people draw? Does anybody say, I mean, I assume people would kind of just colloquially use the term UFO because that's like the wastebasket term for like anything you're going to see that you don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But does anyone go like, it's aliens, it's a spaceship, it's a flying saucer, it's whatever? Or is it just kind of descriptive terminology around like, oh, it looks like Christmas lights and or it's a UFO? Does anybody like vocalize any kind of conclusions or speculation?
Yes. Holly isn't sure from when I talked to her. I mean, she thinks it's probably some type of flying saucer, but she doesn't know. Jack feels a little more strongly about that, at least judging by when I've spoken with him. He sees this as he interprets it as possibly them communicating with him, whatever this was. I mean, he hasn't specifically said like aliens from Zeta Reticuli, but he says like, in the tape, one of the highlights of the tape and his portion of the tape is when he says, "Oh my God," when he screams, "Oh my God." It's shortly after he was picking up a couple returns. He said when they formed up, he thought that they were forming an arrow pointing directly at his weather station at first. But then when he says he felt that they were aware of him watching them and how they were watching him, he sees this as a form of communication, maybe a semiotic communication, kind of like Valet says. So he feels pretty convinced that it's ET. I mean, he had, as he describes, kind of a connection with this sighting.
That's quite intriguing. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I mean, something I said earlier tonight was just the difference between consciousness and self-organizing systems, right? Mm-hmm. Like we see, like Conway's Game of Life will show you that systems self-organize just algorithmically. It has nothing to do with whether there's actual thinking or minds behind it. And these are behaviors, patterns of behavior that you see exhibited in all different kind of states and materials, whether it's the way humans self-organize in communities or the way insects self-organize. It's basically just all part of complexity science.
Yeah.
And when we talk about the inclination to attribute deliberate behavior or communication to these events, it can very well be that you're witnessing a system undergoing some degree of self-organization and reorganization without there actually being meaningful intelligence behind it, right?
Right. How do you distinguish true intelligence from what you're projecting onto something?
Exactly. Yeah. And you hear these descriptions frequently when people talk about what they've witnessed, that, oh, it's like, it reminds them of like a bee or an insect's flight path or how they move around.
Right.
But my point, it just is that things can appear to, like, in a very general sense, the same way a basic AI is intelligent. Like you could say, okay, like this behavior of self-organization is also intelligent, but that doesn't confer consciousness or general intelligence to what you're witnessing. It just means that there's some sort of mechanistic property to what the phenomena, like what the phenomenology of this event is.
Right. That's why I draw no conclusions from this other than it's still a mystery. It's something to identify still. And it's a really interesting one because it doesn't seem to fit into the typical categories.
Yeah, that was a really good point there, I think. I just shared a video in our private chat. I don't know if you can play that, Leah, just because I'm on my laptop, it'll freeze up when I tried to screen share before. But it shows an experiment in a California university, I can't remember which one, very high energy microwave, essentially, electromagnetic field applied to charged flakes of carbon. So they're behaving like you would expect, plasmoids to behave. And I would just, I don't know if we can play it, but
let me try. We're gonna.
I think based on what you were just talking about, it's going to be it's one of these videos that I've sent to people over and over starting last summer when they talk about the perception of intelligence. And it is just when I first saw it, I was like, okay, well, maybe none of us are alive then. This is just like pure physics.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share this video.
Perfect. You got it.
You ready?
If you can turn up the resolution, because they're very tiny, but okay, there we go. Okay, so they're moving, the tiny little flakes of carbon moving around inside the microwave, and then they start circling around the central energy source. They interact with each other. Some of them are moving like the sort of falling leaf effect. Some are jumping forward periodically. Some fall down from very high instantaneously to surface level, in quotes.
Why, these look like Tic Tacs.
They look like insects. They look like living things. If you were using phased array radar on an object like that, you could move it around physically with the radar beam. They interact with radar. They interact with all kinds of, any kind of thing that can be charged. So this video, anyway, very interesting. You can see it looks like a living thing. And it's just flakes of carbon charged.
I mean, it's very similar to the claims of the kind of behavior and movement of these things.
Yeah, just that circling effect around, like it reminded me so much of what you were saying, coming together like that. Yeah. Anyway, who knows, but intriguing.
Yeah. Oh, so Ginny Tilley, who I mentioned before, who I believe is the source of that waterfall UFO. She and a lot of members of Michigan MUFON ended up leaving because of the way MUFON was the handling of evidence. A lot of witnesses never got their provided photos or videos back. There was a big falling out, and she ended up creating a new group called Beam Up There, BIMUP, in Grand Rapids. This is a couple years later, and this is their publication, The Outer Connection. I think this is the only issue that exists.
Wow.
And it was completely focused on the Michigan 94 case.
Can I ask how you get this? Did you get this online or
this image right here is actually what started me down the road for this case. Years ago, an old friend of mine showed me this. He's like, dude, have you ever seen this? This was from In Town. And it just blew my mind because it's from the mid 90s. Like I would have freaked out if I had found this as a kid during this time. I was a big believer in UFOs and the abduction phenomenon at the time. I was a big X-Files fan. So seeing this would have really freaked me out. So I was
that's cool.
But this picture that they showed me, it was a very small JPEG image of just this cover. And I searched for the full copy of it for a really long time. Kind of forgot about it. And then during the pandemic, another buddy of mine kind of influenced me to go into UFO podcasting before I realized that market's oversaturated. And I picked up my search for this, and I did find the full issue.
Excellent.
Eventually. Cool. Yeah. But this issue is really interesting. There was she did kind of a brief overview of the case and about her disagreements with MUFON and why she left. But there was another writer, and I can't remember his name, and I can't read it off of this. What was his name? Dave Reinhardt. That's what it is. Dave Reinhardt, another new member of Beam Up. He tells this story in this issue of internet chat rooms and forums. This is early internet. We're talking 96 or so, I think. And he meets this figure with secret connections, secret info. This might sound familiar. But and he's going on. He gives it like a pseudonym, and they talk back and forth. He says he's a government insider. He says he has information for him, secret information that he took from the government, is going to send it to him. And then allegedly this figure, I think he goes by the name Dave in this, the pseudonym, this deep throat character, allegedly dies. And then Dave Reinhardt receives an envelope, a manila envelope, and it's filled with these maps. Now, these maps are not secret government documents. If you look at them, they are the maps that Michael Swords and Jack Bouchon drew. Now, Michael Swords kept a copy of those maps, and he brought them back to QFOS. I have the scans of the originals. And then the other copies went to the NOAA. So presumably, these maps were FOIA'd by someone and sent to this Dave Reinhardt guy. And he was fed kind of a cloak and dagger story around it. And I'm not exactly sure the purpose of that. But this is essentially, this is technically how these radar blanks became public, because this came out before the International UFO Reporter Journal issue on the topic came out. That would be the journal that Michael Swords wrote his piece in. So, I mean, his piece actually mentions receiving an issue of this. They sent it to him. And he's reading the article. He's like, this is interesting. I recognize his name, Ginny Tilly. And then he sees his own maps in the back attached to this Cloak and Dagger story. And he's like, this is really odd. And he wrote her, in my perspective, it was kind of a rude letter. I have a copy of that too, if you guys privately want to see that. So there's a bit of animosity in between these UFO groups as they were investigating. They're kind of hurling judgment back and forth. That's where this case sits. MUFON wrote one journal article about it. Michael Swords in the IUR wrote one journal article about it. He comes to a couple conclusions and does a little bit of math that I think was wrong. And math is not my strong suit. But I do mention all of this, the subsequent investigations in the part 2 of my videos on the original Invisible Night School YouTube channel. I should probably change the name of that. But I go over that a little bit. But then this case that they tout as the best witnessed case in modern history gets dropped. No one follows up with Michigan MUFON for these videos to close that gap. And this is where we sit. And now, every couple years, they'll do a local piece on My News in Michigan. UFO hunters will.
That's right. This is in your backyard.
Yeah, I have visited the on the ground locations, sighting times multiple times, just to kind of get a perspective and a feel, on the ground, actually looking, seeing where they're watching. I wanted to feel it out.
How much of this is part of like the local zeitgeist? Like, do people know about this case? Does the guy at the weed store know about this case?
No, nobody does. That's why I agreed in the first place to even participate with Unsolved Mysteries while I was researching this. Is that more awareness of this case gets more eyes and minds on it to maybe help figure it out. And it's just a really cool case. And it really surprises me that people know the Phoenix Lights or the Ariel School case and they don't know this one. When this one's actually, I think, a compelling mystery. I mean, I feel like this is better than a lot of those ones that people typically know, even like things like Roswell and stuff like that. Right. Even Hudson Valley. I think this is more...
and like Phoenix Lights, like when there is a verification that a military plane was dropping flares in there, even if it was hours separate or whatever, it kind of makes it like, okay, it's a bit of a write-off. And it's just interesting, like, Simon Fly at the start was like, oh, could these have been military flares? It's the first question we should ask, but the radar operator was looking for planes and stuff, right? And so like he would have seen that. So it makes it more compelling in some ways for that reason as well. So I think your point stands very
he did say that the returns were much brighter than even like commercial jets. So you have to understand he described it as a band essentially for each return as a flat band, and the wider the band is, the brighter or the stronger the return. Like radars work by firing microwaves at things, and what bounces back is that signal. And it was nearly a full return, and it was very bright, as he called it.
I remember him, like on the Unsolved Mysteries, he said something to the effect of like he was expecting that it would have been highly polished metal based on the return, because like nothing else is like that vibrant.
Right. Yeah, it's something like extremely reflective, which also kind of speaks to, I mentioned it earlier, where he said he thought that maybe whatever these things were assisting the signal. So like firing microwaves back to be seen, which is like a common theme in UFO sightings. A lot of witnesses say they felt it wanted to be seen. And they also had the impression that the observers were aware, and there was kind of a dual awareness there. You see that in his experience and his unconventional kind of witnessing of this event.
And in the UAP and the UK ADR report, that secret British report written by their top radar expert, and then we've gone over it, but he asserts that UFOs do exist, and they're probably these atmospheric plasma phenomena, ball lightning type things. Now, something interesting in there, he's talking about how the energy level, the ionization level of the object can produce different effects. So sometimes it could be visually observable, like luminous. Other times it's traveling around, but it's fully invisible because it's just not ionizing the air around it. So it's actually like the it's a ball of energy, but it depends on like the wavelength and stuff.
Right.
About how, yeah, I don't know. It's just the way that the report in the UK talks about it. It like you would expect the objects based on their nature to interact with radar systems, and therefore it would appear that they are interacting with the radar in some way. Like it's kind of like in the Nimitz event. I was talking to an engineer, a German engineer guy, and he was telling me that you would actually expect that if Kevin Day zoomed in on the what could have been a plasmoid and then switched the radar over very quickly to the rendezvous point, it could have actually physically dragged the plasmoid, and that would be what would have, because it's phased array radar, it is a very tight beam. You control exactly where it is. And the Soviets were using these experiments in the 90s, and I mean, conceptually, the Russians moving forward to actually control plasma phenomena using phased array radar and stuff. So it's like a known mechanism, and the radar gets bounced off these things, or depending on the entry level, it doesn't bounce off. So like all these things are consistent with the possibility of this sort of way of explaining it.
In the episode, now Jack never personally claimed this to me in the several conversations that we've had, but he did mention this in the show, and it does kind of track with what I do know, is that he did say that they seemed to stay in the cone of his beam as he was shining it down there. It appeared that they were bouncing around and moving, but within that cone. So I mean,
similarity with Day's accounts too, jumping up and down in altitude, the bouncing around, very similar.
But aside from that, like I said, they've done a couple shows on it, but it's still not a well-known case. But I think it's an interesting one, and I mean that's where it stays. We still have those 10 videos and a dozen photographs that no one has seen except for MUFON, and that's it. And I think that they could possibly make that connection between the on the ground and the radar sightings. We don't know until we see them. And I'm still always reaching out, trying to find more witnesses, find more information about this case. I'm going to look into that campsite, as one of the viewers asked me about. And I'm still investigating this case. I think I will until we can at least come up with a fairly plausible solution for it.
And what's the primary angle you're using right now? Is it sort of trying to get into that exact claim about the observation with the video occurring at the same time as the radar? Is that sort of the most promising thing?
What I'm trying to do, and what I've done a little bit, is I'm trying to nail time down, like essentially timestamp everything. Due to the way the 911 tape was recorded, I'm not sure if I can actually use that to denote time. I know that Holly Graves made that 911 call at 9:35, and I know Officer Velthouse showed up at her house at 9:45. Those are the two known points. You can kind of make rough estimates due to the length of certain calls on the tape. But like for instance, there's no specific exact time that dispatch called Jack. That would really help. I mean, we have his estimates of time, we have the witnesses' estimates of time, and we have those 2 time points. If I could hammer that down with any new information I could find, it might make it better. Because like my goal, and this is what I explained to those producers as well, is I want to conclusively link visual sighting to the radar sighting. You know what I mean? We have the general motion of the things. It appears, I mean, like it probably was the same thing, but we can't say that for certain. And I would like to feel more comfortable. Gaps in the weather data. I have limited weather information. I know that it was a clear night. I know that it was cold. I know that a couple of investigators in their journals wrote that they checked the weather information, though they didn't provide any actual data. I think that is something that you can look up, though. I mean, like multiple organizations keep.
Yeah, NOAA should have historical weather data available.
Yep. I may have even looked it up before, but never actually done anything with it because it's a little outside my wheelhouse.
We also have this comment from Dylan. I guess I'm stuck on color tonight. Any instance of the laboratory phenomenon in Campbell's video exhibiting colors like green and blue as well? The movement plus radar interaction does seem to fit.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. That's something that I've been thinking about a lot too, especially when I was watching the first half of this on Netflix earlier. The multicolored statements, it clicks with me because those are observations that have been made in Hezbollah. Mm-hmm. Those are observations that have been reported by Navy eyewitnesses. Something that makes no sense, like lights that are changing like a Christmas tree, like coloration.
I mean, some of that could just be like atmospheric, right? Like viewed at a distance with any kind of cloud cover, or especially if we're talking about like electrical phenomena. Like, I mean, I just think of how like it makes me think of like neon signs, right?
Yes.
How different gas compositions electrify with different colors.
This is exactly what Dr. Tiederani has written about in his paper, that exact thing. Like different kinds of meteorites, when they come through the atmosphere, they burn different colors because it's ionization of different elements. The color is the element being burned. And there are actually some interesting photos he's got in his paper of three light balls together over the treetops with a red and a blue smaller lights that seem to be, he says, based on the observation at the time, that they were rotating around. He's saying he thinks that they are different elements being ionized, and the different colors could be different aerosols that are in the specific air in that location, because in the lab experiments, what you do is you inject a high burst of energy with a variety of substances, which sometimes can be aerosolized particles or a fluid solution. So the makeup of those things does produce that effect, and you can produce all the different colors in a laboratory environment. And maybe I'll just send you, Leah, a video quickly that's really cool on YouTube that we could just click through really fast, because it shows all the different colors in a plasmoid in a high energy environment. So I'll just grab that right now.
Sure.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna call out this comment from Hinch here. Leah went to RPI. I'm from Waterford. Hinch, I don't know if you're saying you went to RPI, but I went to RPI. Former U.S. Coast Guard radar technician, Raytheon 64X band radar, top secret clearance. Got some UFO data that's never seen the public eye. Well, Hinch, I have great news for you. I have open DMs on Twitter. That's my name. Feel free to shoot me a message. Would love to talk to you about this. I use all kinds of end-to-end encrypted communications, including Signal, WhatsApp, Proton Mail, etc. So if you ever want to talk shop, feel free to hit me up.
David Borer says, shouldn't there be way more witnesses? Now, if you listen to the radar or the 911 call, the dispatcher mentions approximately 60 calls. I don't know if that was an exaggeration or not, since we only—
That's a lot of calls.
It is
for an event that's only 30 minutes. And I mean, we're not talking about a super dense population area, right? Like it's city, but we're not talking about Midtown Manhattan, right?
No,
like
it's suburbs.
It's suburbs. It's 9:00 at night in March, right?
Yeah,
so people aren't going to be out barbecuing or walking the dog.
Now, MUFON makes the claim that there were hundreds of witnesses. However,
really,
yes, in their journal. However, those reports aren't anywhere. The reports I personally have are from one investigator, Donald Ashley, and he interviewed the truck driver who saw it the night before, Cindy Pravda, and the Graves family, and Officer Velthouse. Those are the only filled out. MUFON, their field investigators have those forms that they fill out where, you check off the little boxes. How far was it? How high was it? They estimated treetop level.
It's like a woo-woo police report.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
They draw little pictures and stuff like that. But like I said, it was the 5 or 6 witnesses. Yet the article does claim hundreds. Now, there are scattershot witnesses that I've spoken to, a couple of them. If you look at my personal YouTube channel, I have an interview with a couple of them there. Someone flying a Cessna, in fact, claimed he was a student at Western, which is where Professor Swords taught at the time. He said he saw it from the air. There were some commercial pilots that allegedly saw it also flying into O'Hare. And they apparently appeared on a TV show. I'd have to check the magazine again for the exact one. Although his bosses caught wind of it and made him drop it. I haven't personally seen that. I can't find a copy. I've seen more recent stuff, but there were more witnesses. Like I said, that waterfall UFO witness that could have been from back then. It's completely possible. Like I said, there were there were a swatch of witnesses that happened that night, allegedly, according to MUFON. So there's room for it. But the witnesses that have value, in my opinion, to the story are the ones that are recorded. So we can kind of have corroboration for that. Because anyone after the fact can kind of say that they witnessed it. In fact, if you are a member of MUFON and you go to their database on their website, you'll see under this case that there was a person who, after the fact, reported to MUFON that they had a dream that this sighting was going to happen. And that was basically the extent of the information that MUFON hosts on this, if you want to look that up.
Not very Campbell, I got that video that you shared of the plasma. Let me get this shared real quick.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, because it's just like a standard microwave, and these plasmoids occur. It'll like change color and stuff. And the video shows like there's just a wide variety of different materials. He just keeps putting different materials into the tray and then microwaving them, and it produces all different colors based on the materials. Wow. And he's doing the spectra. He's shows all of the spectral readings. It's pretty cool. Yeah. And then later in the video, you see there's actually like a highly stable one that ends up flying around freely in the microwave. It's quite interesting. And it actually exhibits some of the motions of the ping pong motion that Fravor describes. It goes to the top of the microwave and just starts going back and forth, like essentially exactly how he described, because it's interacting with the energy source.
It's really fascinating. Well, I mean, cool. That's where I'm at with the case now. Like I said, I'm still always looking for more information on it. And I'm also trying to nail down that timeline and also speak to new witnesses where I can.
Yeah, I was going to say, Nick, if any viewers or listeners want to get in touch with you to talk about this or share anything, what's the best way to find you?
You can find me on Twitter, IMDS Night School. Or do we have an email address associated with theinvisiblenightschool.com?
No. We probably should. We should set up a dedicated Proton mail so people can send us hot tips.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice. Or just hit me up on Twitter or comment below. I actually I met a witness that I didn't know about in YouTube comments.
Cool.
One of the local network affiliates ran a piece on this maybe 6 months ago or so, and in the comment section was where I actually hooked up with one of the witnesses, where she was attending high school at the time. She had just come back from some kind of competitive thing. I don't remember what sport, or maybe it was cheer or something like that, or basketball maybe. She had just come home with her mom and felt compelled to look up outside the door, looked up and saw this bright white light.
An ineffable force summoned her.
I specifically asked her, I was like, what made you look up? And she's like, I don't know. I just did. And she's like, it wasn't a helicopter or a plane, because it was white light and it shot off. And that was like right in the middle of these on the ground sightings, cool. Right in the area too. So people did see, I mean, she was like a teenager at the time. Yeah. This was 30 years ago, but yeah, I mean, meeting new witnesses all the time, always willing to talk to any of them too, even if it's these waterfall witnesses that I don't believe exist. I'd love to hear more about that, honestly. But,
well, apparently it would be very popular if you found them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was such a strange claim. These midnight beach campers in winter witnessing something so strange that allegedly corroborates the timeline, although it contradicts it. I don't know.
Yeah, on the shoreline in the winter, like any of us three from the Northeast instantly are like, no, that doesn't make sense.
Nobody's out there. It's way too cold.
Yeah.
Did Newfolk ever look into this?
There may be an entry there, but not as far as I know. The only ones that I know investigating were MUFON, of course, and then Michael Swords from QFOS, and he came down with his friend Dave Ford, who was actually a member of NICAP at the time. The extent that Dave Ford participated in the investigation seemed to be getting Professor Swords in the door at the Weather Service. He mentioned that Professor Swords was a science teacher from Western Michigan University, and that kind of made them feel like, oh, okay, we can let this guy in. especially as Michael Swords puts it, the UFO investigators were kind of leaving a bad taste in everybody's mouth at the time. And
UFO people pissing everyone off, making the normies mad. I'm shocked.
Yeah,
I can only imagine like walking down the street, just like grabbing every person they see. What did you see? What did you see?
Yes.
Now,
Michael Swords is a real one too.
Yeah.
Like, quick plug. Like, he's amazing. His blog is amazing. Like,
yes.
Nick, I was gonna say, like, one of the pet projects I've been thinking about doing is scraping his blog and then putting it in chronological order so you could read it like a book.
That would be awesome.
Oh, wow.
Because like his blog is incredible. It's really thoughtful. It's really interesting, and it covers this like 15 years, like some crazy amount of time. It is extremely prolific.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. I also highly recommend his book, Grassroots UFOs or Grassroots.
Oh yeah,
I believe about his traveling display of UFOs in malls, and then just people would walk up to them and offer their own unique UFO experiences. It's not for the people who are looking for hard data or anything, but it is a book I like to revisit when I'm feeling a little cynical. Just these average people who see a UFO display, a traveling UFO display in a mall that compels them to share their stories. It's a collection of all those, and they range all over the place. But it's just, I don't know, kind of a fun read.
It's cool. It's like modern day folklore, right?
Yeah.
These kinds of listening tours are so interesting. I mean, that's what gets me so hot to trot on doing ethnographic research on in interviews with experiencers, is because so much of these narratives are passed through like government filters, military filters. Just having these direct one-on-one conversations where people recount their experiences is so fascinating. And to me, it feels like kind of the like grassroots work that's super compelling about the subject.
One little thing that I didn't mention, Jack Bouchon's boss at the time, Leo Grenier, I think is how you say his last name. He was interviewed by quite a few news outlets at the time. And he claimed he was former military and that he knew exactly what these things were, but he couldn't say it. And maybe sometime in the future, he would pass on the information. I don't know. Unfortunately, he passed away without doing so. But
of course.
He liked to throw that in many interviews that he was former. I don't know if he was Navy. I'd have to look that up. I don't know the specifics. Former military, and he said he knew exactly what these were, but couldn't speak on it, which is fun.
Everything old is new again.
Yeah. And another thing about that is Jack actually did get a reputation in this town, and it touches on that in the show too. The stigma that you hear about, he actually did face. I mean, his coworkers at the time really gave him a hard time for being the guy who saw UFOs on the radar. And he ended up moving to Georgia, I believe, and working for the weather station down there just to kind of escape it, and never brought it up again there, which it was really great because I reached out to him out of the blue when I first started investigating this case. He was the first person I reached out to. One of the first steps I did in investigating this case outside of looking at the news clippings at the AFU. And he was really willing to talk about it at the time. He said, cool. I've thought about it in a long time, haven't talked about it, but yeah. And he was like really helpful in the beginning, just always being willing to talk about his experience and how he personally felt and how he personally experienced this, more so like emotionally while looking at this radar screen. So I thought that was really awesome. All of the witnesses that I've been able to get a hold of and speak to are really genuine and really open about sharing their experiences with me, and they're super helpful. So, I don't always recommend like reaching out to strangers and bugging them about UFOs, but the people in this case were really cool about it, and developed friendships with them too. So like we still keep in touch. Like they were all talking to me after the episode aired, and I got kind of their feedback on it. They all said it was pretty good. I mean, like none of them had heard of that waterfall one either, except for Jenny Tilly, apparently. But
of course,
yeah. But that's where I'm at with it. Always looking for more information to fill in those gaps.
Wonderful. Well, Nick, thank you so much. This was excellent. And also, it was really great to have these visuals to accompany your talk track. Like that was very helpful, since we've only just talked about this case, but this kind of helped knit together parts of the narrative and events with different eyewitness accounts. So very, very well done.
I feel like the diagram of the neighborhood where the on the ground people kind of helps you get a better understanding of what's going on, and like the fact, it's all within a mile or two, especially that the person right up around the corner on the second floor balcony, kind of looking over the shoulders of the other witnesses and describing the same thing on that tape, I think is one of the more compelling aspects of the whole case.
Great comment here from Steve Goldman. Camping in this region after Labor Day in this region crushes credibility. Beware of fake reluctance charade. Yeah, I think that's a lot of our impressions. I was born and raised in upstate New York. Campbell's in Canada, Nick's in Michigan. Yeah, it gets very cold.
On the lakeside, it makes no sense.
Right, on the lakeside. And if you were camping there that time of night, like I've done cold weather camping and winter camping, you're not out of your tent looking around outside. You are like wrapped in merino wool and your quilt and your pad and your rain fly and everything. You're not outside looking around.
Right.
From Derek, that was awesome. Thanks.
Nice.
Swink. Another great show.
Swink.
Great.
Yeah, I do want to say that waterfall claim that is getting I'm taking that with a grain of salt, and I recommend everybody else who watches that episode. I definitely recommend people watch that episode of Unsolved Mysteries and Unsolved Mysteries in general. I mean, I grew up on that show. I'm disappointed my segment got cut from it, but like I said, it could very well be a legitimate sighting. I'm not trying to insinuate that they're lying or anything like that. I've just never heard of it, and like I said, well, take everything obviously with a grain of salt. Take no one's word for it, but keep that in mind when watching that episode. That waterfall or that water-sucking UFO was never part of the original story. And I personally, as someone who's been researching this case for a couple of years now, I think it's really questionable.
Right. Great. All right. Before we wrap things up, let's just do a quick roundtable about what people are working on. Campbell, what are you doing?
I have been working on my website again. I think I mentioned last week I was adding a few of those extra pages. So just been adding more of my interviews under a subpage. And then I've been messing around with the content a bit, trying to clean it up, make it move smoother, just always trying to improve it. And I'm working on a final sort of like conclusion. Nick, you inspired me last week to actually kind of try to maybe dive into a series of the highest profile historic cases a little bit, just to sort of show what's going on with that. So I've started to sort of create the skeleton of that. So that's what I've been doing.
Are you including Mino? Is that how you say it? Mino Air Force?
Yeah. Oh, Minot. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I only know that because I was Air Force ROTC, and Minot was where they threatened to send you if you like really sucked and were at the bottom of your class.
Do they say Minot?
Yeah, Minot Air Force Base.
That's
it's
beautiful.
Also notable because it was like the last place in the United States, I think, where you could drink at 18. Yeah.
Okay. That's
Small
really
mercy
funny
if you're trapped up there. Yeah, I know.
Because when I was reading it, I always was like saying it in my head, like the French way, right? Because we're bilingual up here. It's like Minot. But
right.
And then I was thinking, like, how would an American say that?
Minot.
Minot.
Yeah,
it's not even right.
Sorry. We ruined everything.
That case does have some striking similarities, as does the 1952 Washington, D.C. case.
I have my list right here, actually. Sorry, go on.
Oh, no, I'm always looking for more cases that have similar like observations, behaviors, and stuff like that, because I think it's really interesting that we classify what I described in this case as a UFO, but also what allegedly happened, like Phoenix Lights as a UFO, Lonnie Zamura's incident and the Tic Tac are UFOs. These things are all like described drastically different ways, and the only thing that's kind of holding them together is the unknown nature, the fact that they are unidentified, yet we kind of have a culture around them where we're kind of implying that they are all the same thing. It's really weird to me.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, that would actually be something. I mean, we'll wrap it up right now, but that's something I could dive into for like 3 hours. If you look through the historic documents, the U.S. Air Force definition of what a UFO is, the FBI's definition of what a UFO is, the Condon report's definition of what a UFO is, UK Ministry of Defense's definition of a UFO is, and then what Jacques Vallée and J. Allen Hynek's definitions of what a UFO is. They are all identical. They describe multicolored luminous objects with the features that we are describing. And then even Hynek and the Air Force and stuff, the CIA as well, I forgot them, of course, so important. They talk about how daylight discs and nocturnal lights. They may be the same phenomenon under different conditions. The nocturnal lights are always luminous, various colors, this and that. During the daytime, the objects exhibit the exact same behaviors, but appear metallic or dull. And so they're saying, and that's something that you would expect from plasma. So, and that's a feature of a lot of reports, is like, oh, the sun was on the other side of the object, but it was shining off this side. It makes no sense. Tons of those. And it's because it was emitting the internal light from the plasmoid. So anyway, yes, long story short, that was something I would love to dive into extensively, but I think there is a consistent definition that we can appeal to. And there are a large number of the most, I think every most prominent case actually contains those features. The ones that I have are 51 Los Alamos, 1952 Washington, D.C., 1959 White Sands, 1968 Minot Air Force Base, 1976 Tehran, 79 Manise, 1980 Rendlesham. The features are the same, 94 Lake Michigan, and then 2004 Nimitz.
Interesting.
So that's what I'm working on now.
I like it.
Me too. It's great. Lewis, what's going on, friend?
I'm just reading some dubious books.
More Nazis and UFOs, huh?
What about I mentioned it to you actually, Leah. The secret ciphers of the UFOnauts by, what's his name? David something Greenfield.
Yeah, there were a couple of his that you shared with me.
Yeah, I don't know, like if they're spoofs, or it seems like it's kind of half serious, so I can't.
Oh, Secret Rituals of the Men in Black and the Complete Secret Cipher of the UFOnauts by Alan Greenfield.
Wow,
excellent.
This is like, man, these are like algorithmically generated titles to UFO people, and they're also exactly in the pose law space where you can't quite tell if they're serious or not. It's like
that sounds really great.
It's extremely compelling.
And the other one is about the Rendlesham case.
Oh,
it's got a bunch of contributors. Do I have it here? Yeah,
that's a weird one.
I showed last time.
You've just disappeared.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, there it is.
Weaponization of an unidentified aerial phenomena.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's got a bunch of people in this American and British people in different roles, including a former aide to Senator John McCain, Cheryl Bennett, and some other people. But I don't know, like it seems like it's got a lot of crap mixed in with some more credible stuff. I'll give you a report.
It's UFOs, man.
Yeah.
Leah, what are you up to?
Yeah, so finally have a project name for my Art Bell initiative. We Own the Night, the legacy of Art Bell and Coast to Coast AM. Nice. I am on the, like Don Quixote tilting at windmills. I'm trying to amass like the most comprehensive research and material repository on Art Bell and Coast to Coast. Been going back and forth with some of the few and far between academics that have studied kind of art and the legacy of Coast to Coast. I'm aiming to have like the skeleton of the archive up online for people to research and use. And I'm also starting to interview people who are either current content creators or were guests on his show at some point to kind of start getting, thoughts, ideas, experiences, etc., around both their interactions with art and then also, how they've carried his legacy forward in their own creative pursuits.
Awesome.
So that's been my day-to-day. I'm also doing the fool's errand of going through all the old predictions shows and annotating all of the predictions.
I like that.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. Lots of conspiracies around 2000-ish about China creating a flu and unleashing it on the world. So it's good to know that linear time is just a function of the limits of human consciousness, and everything happens all at once. So what people were crowing about in the tinfoil hat crowd 20 years ago is still the exact same.
Fascinating.
But Art Bell, greatest of all time. Sorry he screwed up everything for the rest of us, but old Coast to Coast episodes are still my favorite listening.
Yeah.
So I don't think we have a theme for next week's show. I guess we'll back channel about that. Might be open lines, might be.
The report will be out.
Show. Oh, the report will be out. We should do an open line episode then and talk about the report and just kind of roundtable on some stuff. You can find us at our Twitter handles. I'm Leah Prime, Campbell UAP Study, Nick INV Night School.
Yeah.
Lewis, ufologyiscorrupt.com.
No Twitter.
Thanks so much for tuning in, folks. Feel free to reach out at any time. And otherwise, hope to see you guys soon. Have a nice night.
Everybody.
Have a good one.
Bye.